Welcome to the Places and Profiles podcast, the podcast that explores the issues, stories, and people that have shaped places into what they are today. Here's your host, Adam Camac.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Places and Profiles podcast. This episode is the About the Show episode. So this is a chance for me to talk about the vision and idea behind the show, what the Places and Profiles podcast will look like, and give a little background on myself as well. The website for the Places and Profiles podcast is placesandprofiles.com. The show notes page for this episode in particular is placesandprofiles.com/1. Every episode of the Places and Profiles podcast will have a show notes page where you can find out more information about the guest or the topic for that episode, and where you can find related resources and links. The format for the show notes page will always be placesandprofiles.com/ and then the number of the episode. So since the About the Show episode is episode number 1, show notes page for this episode is placesandprofiles.com/1. So why should you listen to the Places and Profiles podcast, and what is this podcast all about? The idea behind the Places and Profiles podcast is to use current events, history, and storytelling to explore the issues, stories, and people that have shaped places into what they are today. The idea is to look at different cities, different states, different countries, different regions, different parts of the world, different industries, and different people of great importance. My hope with this podcast is that we will not just be merely scratching the surface on a place or a topic, but that when we discuss these different places, these different people, these different events, that we will be going into depth. Each episode ideally will be less than an hour, somewhere around 50 minutes. However, based on the episodes I've already recorded, that will probably not be the case for some of the episodes. Several of the episodes will go over an hour, just given the subject matter at hand, the nature of the topic being discussed. It will be unavoidable to have some longer episodes. My hope is that this podcast will ensure that there is an opportunity for audience members, for listeners to be able to provide feedback, that there will be engagement, that this will be an open conversation between you, the listener, and me, the host, and that the episodes will come across as conversations between myself and guests, with the hope that almost every episode will have a guest. Obviously, for episodes where there is no guest and it's just me talking, such as this episode, the conversational nature of the episode will not be there in the same way. But I hope that the episodes with guests, without guests, all of the episodes will still be engaging and interesting and approachable for you, the listener. So some ways that you can contact me as the host, some ways that you can interact with the show. So at placesandprofiles.com, there is a contact page. placesandprofiles.com/contact is the place to go for that. There is a contact form you can fill out. That will be a good place to go to send me feedback, send me guest ideas, topic ideas, anything of that sort. I'm also on Twitter or X. The handle for that is at Places Profiles. So the word "and" is not in there. That makes the handle too long for Twitter's liking. So at Places Profiles is the handle for that. I also have a LinkedIn page, so you can reach out there. I hope to build up my social media presence more moving forward. These shows will also be available on YouTube. Initially, we will not be doing video, so the YouTube version initially will be a still slide with the podcast logo, my picture, and the guest picture, and then the audio playing in the background. But you can leave comments, leave feedback on YouTube. You can also leave comments on the individual show notes pages on the placesandprofiles.com website. There will always be opportunities for comments and discussion there. Another place that you can leave comments is by leaving reviews on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or any podcatcher that you choose to use. This podcast will be available on all major podcatchers. So hopefully you'll be leaving 5 stars for your ratings, but you're strongly encouraged to subscribe, rate, and review the show via your preferred podcatcher. The frequency and format for the show moving forward ideally will be 3 episodes per week. Obviously, as you can tell from this episode coming out on September 18th, and that there are 2 other episodes published on September 18th, 2023, that for launch day, there are 3 episodes. But beyond that, my plan is to have 1 episode published every Monday, an episode every Wednesday, and an episode every Friday, so 3 episodes per week. If there are particularly significant topics in the news or particularly interesting topics in the news that could necessitate a 4th episode in some cases, there may be situations where, due to other obligations and scheduling difficulties in my own life, that the number of episodes decreases in a particular week. If that is the case, I will let you know of any anticipated formatting changes to the show schedule before that occurs. But the plan moving forward is 3 episodes per week, with episodes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and for the episodes to be released at 3 a.m. Eastern Time, 2 a.m. Central Time, so that these episodes are available on your morning commute if that is when you wish to listen to the episodes. I do want to provide a disclaimer before I move forward with this about the show episode. So, as I said, most of these episodes will be interview-based. That means I'm talking and a guest is talking, obviously. Sometimes the guests will offer some opinions or will offer their interpretation of different documents, of different figures, of different events, of different doctrine. Although my hope is that this podcast will be a format that will allow for a wide variety of people, places, events to be covered in great detail. And I will do my best to remove my own political biases to the extent possible from the show. Obviously, there will be guests who express their opinions in the context of their answers or express their opinions in the context of their interpretations of events that have already occurred or are in the process of occurring. I have no intention of censoring guests. So although there will be editing done to episodes for the sake of time and per guest request and for ease of listening, I will not be going back and editing out large chunks. So there will not be censorship and there will not be excessive editing out of responses or comments on the part of a guest. But I also don't want this podcast to be viewed as providing a platform, quote unquote, in the way that we might think of that in the 2023 context. I am merely trying to explore different topics, different places, different people, different events with ideally expert guests that I have on. And that is the goal of this show, to focus on those specific topics. So guests, in a lot of cases, will offer opinions. I am trying to distance myself from any guest opinions. I am trying to avoid my own biases coming out for the most part to the extent possible on this show. So I just want to put that disclaimer and that piece of clarification on the record during this first episode. Now, during these episodes, there will be a pre-roll and a mid-roll. And for those of you that are not familiar with the way podcasting works, this is connected to advertising. So affiliate partnerships are partnerships where a podcast host or a business owner would get a commission or a percentage of revenue connected to sales that they drive. Sponsorships would involve a podcast host or a business owner getting paid a sum of money prior to the advertising taking place. So hopefully I will have sponsors down the road that will require a larger audience. So hopefully you will like the podcast, you will tell your friends, your family about it, and the audience will grow significantly, and I will be able to get sponsors who are paying in advance. But for now, any ads connected to the show will be affiliate ads. So these are pre-rolls and mid-rolls. The pre-roll is the advertisement at the very beginning of the episode, and the mid-roll is the advertisement that comes roughly halfway through the episode. So these are pre-rolls and mid-rolls where I am coming up with the script and where the only way I get money from these companies is if you purchase through my link. So hopefully these companies' products and services will be of value to you and you will opt to purchase through my link. So here's an example of what a mid-roll would sound like on this podcast. If you're interested in starting a website, then use Bluehost. I use Bluehost for placesandprofiles.com, and it's great. Their customer support is quick, responsive, and helpful, and it works well with WordPress, WooCommerce, Google Workspace, and countless other online tools. As an added bonus, if you get your domain name or hosting through my Bluehost link, then I will mention your website on the show and link to your website on placesandprofiles.com. As long as your website is not inappropriate and is not significantly opposed to my beliefs and values, I will be happy to support your website and your project. Check out Bluehost and get your domain name and hosting today by going to placesandprofiles.com/blue. Again, that's placesandprofiles.com/blue. All right, so moving on, I'll tell you a little more about myself now that we got out of the way the format of the episodes and why you should listen to the podcast. So as was mentioned during the introduction to the episode, my name is Adam Camac. I live in the Houston area, and I have experience as a teacher with both teaching geography and AP European history. And I've had a deep fondness for travel, for history, for understanding the world, for politics, for reading about the news ever since I was a little kid. So when I was a little kid, I had all these atlases, and they got beaten up, torn up very quickly because of the excessive amount that I was using them. I've been to 49 states, 23 countries, and 6 continents so far, and I'm recording this on September 17, 2023, so hopefully those numbers will all be growing in the near future. So my experiences as a world traveler, my interests in history, geography, things of the sort, have led me to want to start this podcast to shed a light and go into depth on some of these different figures and places and events around the world. I also have a deep interest in empowering people to live fulfilling, happy, and healthy lives. So at my other website, or one of my other websites, adamcamac.com, I write blog posts where I try to provide inspiration and encouragement and motivation for people who are struggling with finding purpose, with being workaholics, with finding their paths through life, all things that I have struggled with myself in recent years. I want to encourage people, empower people to develop the courage and the bravery to be able to live lives that make them happy and fulfilled. So Gary Vaynerchuk, he is an entrepreneur. He is an internet personality, and a phrase that he often uses is one life, no regrets. So a lot of the things that I'm doing, a lot of the things that I'm writing about are done through that lens. So my idea with what I am doing is that through this podcast, Places and Profiles, people will be able to learn about the world around them through the sorts of things that I'm writing about on my blog and hopefully speeches that I give connected to my work at adamcamac.com that will ensure that people have the courage and bravery to do what they want and are passionate about in this world that they've been learning about on the Places and Profiles podcast. My last name is spelled C-A-M-A-C, so adamcamac.com is that other website. Of course, placesandprofiles.com is the website for this podcast. So I'm very excited about starting this podcast. The origins of this podcast, in large part, go back to a phone conversation I had with one of my friends a couple of years ago. And we were talking about different midterm election cycles, since the 2022 midterms were about a year and a half away at that time. And I started talking about some stuff with the 2006 and the 2010 midterms. And my friend interrupted me in the middle of what I was saying and told me that I provide way more insight, way more information than can be found from a typical political site, from typical articles or things that can be found online. So that conversation and the sorts of things I was saying about different places and different background that I was provided the impetus and some of the motivation for getting this podcast started. As I've said, I am interested in politics, so although this is not a political podcast per se, and I am not pushing my political biases, there obviously will be discussion of politicians, of elections, of things of that sort. And in fact, when you go to placesandprofiles.com, sign up, subscribe to the email list, you'll get a PDF I put together, 8 fascinating election results, and that to some degree shows the depth of my political junkiness, but hopefully you'll find the stories, the information that are included in that PDF to be an interesting read. The first dozen or so episodes of the podcast will proceed as follows. The first episode is the episode you're listening to right now. That is the About the Show episode. The second episode will focus on the life and legacy of Juan and Eva Perón and the continuing influence of Peronism in Argentina. The third episode will focus on significant figures and events in the historical and cultural development of the state of Oklahoma. The next episode is looking at the song Country Roads and its impact and significance to the state of West Virginia and its global impact. The fourth interview-based episode, fifth episode total, is going to be looking at the history of Korea. Then we are going to be looking at Switzerland. After that, we'll have some stories and insights regarding the real story behind the Titanic. So not the James Cameron Hollywood story per se, but what actually happened with Titanic. After that, we're going to be looking at John Paul II, his life and legacy. Then we're taking a look at the history of the British monarchy and some of the significant figures connected to that. After that, we'll be looking at Huey Long, who was a governor and senator from Louisiana in the late 1920s up through the mid-1930s, and in many ways is regarded to have ruled Louisiana as a dictator during that time. So we're going to look at his legacy and significance. Then we will be taking a look at Singapore. We'll look at some things related to Mexico and U.S.-Mexican relations. Then we're going to look at the history of Las Vegas, and there will be a special focus on the mob, organized crime, gambling, and all sorts of fun topics in that episode. So that's what the first dozen or so episodes will look like, just to give you a good sense as you're listening to this About the Show episode. Obviously, my hope is that there will be hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of episodes that will follow beyond those, and I hope that you will be along for that journey. So again, the show notes page for today's episode is placesandprofiles.com/1. I hope that you will sign up for the email list, that you will subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcatcher, and I want to thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Places and Profiles podcast. Please visit placesandprofiles.com to subscribe and listen to more episodes. Come back again soon, and thanks for listening.